Well, welcome back to another Waynosfotos video, and this is really like a community announcement one. And I was just watching a video from Rail at Leisure Technique, and this is not something new that's been discussed, not discussed on this channel, not discussed on Rail's Leisure Techniques channel, but it is about the internal cabling that passes through the stem and fork, not internal cabling that goes through the frame. So it's that part that we're seeing on a lot of the higher end new bikes, which have the integrated stem, fork system, handlebar system, and the cables all go internally. Now, as Rail points out, and also I've pointed out, it looks very neat, it looks clean, and you could probably argue it has some aero benefits, but I think that they would probably be relatively insignificant. But just to get more of an aesthetic look on the bicycle, we're actually compromising some of the strength and wear techniques, the wear parts of the bike and the fork and the way that they're going through into the frame, and also further down the fork for the braking systems, and also any electric wiring that may need to be used, although many of them are going wireless now. So let's roll our intro and let's have a little bit of a talk about that. Well, the problem is, and I've raised this before on this channel, that what they're doing is they're offsetting the bearing from the top fork there with a spacer. Now, this spacer normally it's just a pressed piece of steel. It's something pretty basic. It's not bonded to the fork. It's something that has a seat on the bearing and it just sits on the fork. It's not bonded, so it potentially can wiggle, it can move, it can rotate. It's not bonded even with any light adhesive like a Loctite or anything in there. And then you're passing the cables through and that piece is rotating. And because it's a pressed piece of steel in general, there's not always smooth surfaces where the cables go on. So what we've seen, what mechanics have seen, and this is not Rail, this is other mechanics, is that you get chafing of these tubes. And manufacturers, I do believe, have come out and said you need to inspect this every 12 months. So you've got to take all that apart, go in there and have a look to see that there's not any significant chafing, and if there is, then you need to change those cables. Now, that's okay to say that, but if you're going to get a mechanic to do that for you, you're not doing it yourself, then there's a significant amount of hours work there, and it's not going to be 20 or 30 bucks. You're probably going to be looking at potentially hundreds of dollars to have that inspected, and if it is chafed, then they've got to re-bleed the whole system, put new tubing in to bring that to a standard where it couldn't potentially fail. Now, what we're also seeing over time, Rail's identified, is that if you have any impact, which could be like you've dropped the bike or you've come off the bike, but nothing's actually broken, there's just been some jar force or hit force that's on the handlebars, then what it does is this spacer then, because of the way it's designed, puts a point pressure on the fork and causes delamination and damages the fork. So now we've got another fail criteria, because like in the old days, it was actually held more tightly and it wasn't levered out from the bearing with this piece that's not seated. And because it's just a pressed piece of steel, it generally has sharp edges. They're not, if you actually see these spacers, they're nothing fancy. It's the design is really, really basic. And I think that there needs to be some discussion in the bicycle industry about this, and also some discussion in the manufacturers, maybe come up with some sort of design that's better, because we have all these different designs at the moment and there's nothing that looks really great. Some of them have D pieces, some of them have these spacer systems, and if they're going to continue with this integrated system, I think that the whole design of it needs to be revisited and they need to come up with something that's a little bit better. It's almost like as if they've just got the old system from when they didn't have internal cabling and kind of just come up with some added bits and pieces to make it all work. I think what we might need some complete redesigning of the way the fork and the headset and everything works to get those cables through. I have put my points forward on this because at the end of the day, you're either drilling holes in the fork and potentially we could make the fork thicker, we could make the fork stronger and put holes in them and run everything through the internal part of that fork, not have any of these set off spaces. But then of course that makes that fork heavy, which manufacturers don't want because weight is sensitive. But I think what we need to do, we need to put safety before weight. I mean, I'm all one who's pro weight when it comes to race bikes, while you're paying 20 to 25,000 for a bike that's heavy. But on the other side of the coin, we need to have safety first. If it's another, 300 or 400 grams heavier, but the fork is thicker and stronger, because this point here, if that fails, unfortunately, you're going to hit the tarmac. It's probably the most important part of the bike when it comes to failure. Like we can have failures on a bike which could probably lead to some sort of accident, but if your fork fails and that wheel gives way, then you're going to face plant the tarmac. So I think that this part of the bike really needs to be made well. It needs to have really good design and engineering in it, and it needs to have some sort of significant over design safety margin. Now, getting back to one of my other videos where we had this Titan submarine, that was a design that was only made to meet the requirements of its dive depth. It wasn't made, there was no built-in extra, like say we're going to 4,000 feet, but it's designed to go to 6,000 feet. I mean meters, sorry. But it didn't have any over-design, or the over-design was very limited, or in some cases it didn't have it at all. So you've got this inbuilt safety margin. Now, generally, if you look at sort of the aircraft industry, then what they either do is that you either over-design a product or you have redundancy. So if something fails, then you have something else that then can take over. Say like an engine on an aeroplane, one stops working, the plane can still fly with the other engine. So this is what we need in the bicycle, and especially when it comes to the headset, which is a part, if it gives way, it could potentially cause significant injury, or it could cause death. Now, I do think that the whole concept of an annual inspection where you take all this part to inspect it, I think in the realms of bicycles, this is a little bit unreasonable. Bicycles are supposed to be simple. They're the sort of thing that some people ride all the time, other people ride them intermediately. And also, if you have a crash or it's dropped or it falls over, or you have a crash, historically, you don't think that you have to like pull the whole bike apart to do an inspection. Now, they might be saying that now, but you generally go, oh, it looks okay, I'm just going to ride it. You don't kind of think, hey, I need to have all this inspection done. And the intrusion that it takes to do that inspection annually is pretty significant, and then that could also cost you some significant amount of money. Okay, you may argue if you're buying a bike worth 20 or 25,000, you should be able to afford to have it inspected. But I don't think that's the perception of most people. They don't buy, because from the past, you bought a bicycle, you didn't really do much to it. The maintenance was pretty similar. Now you're expecting people to have a different mindset. And I think that culture hasn't really matured yet. So guys, let me know what you think down below. With this headset system and these internal cables, yeah, they look smick and it all looks clean, and you're buying an expensive bike and you want it to look as nice as possible. But the compromise that we're having on continued inspections and safety, I think overshadows that, and should be the other way around. We should be saying, hey, it doesn't look quite as nice, but we're making sure it's safe, rather than, hey, we're making sure it looks nice, but maybe you need to do some more inspection, or we're compromising the design of it if it gets banged or you drop the bike. Okay guys, that's where I'm going to leave it, and I will see you next video.